Hello and welcome to History at Night. Imagine waking up each morning above the clouds. Imagine a city so high in the mountains that the mist swirls through its stone streets like a living thing. Imagine terraces carved impossibly into vertical cliffs, temples aligned perfectly with the sun, and a civilization that built an empire without the wheel, without iron, and without written language. This is not a fantasy. This is Machu Picchu, the city in the sky. And tonight we will walk through its streets and live the daily lives of the people who called this impossible place home. But before we begin our journey to this sacred mountain refuge, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us continue creating these long-form historical journeys for you. I'm also always curious to know where in the world you're joining me tonight. Are you watching from Peru itself? From somewhere else in the Americas? From across the ocean in Europe, Asia, or Australia? Please let me know in the comments below. Tell me your location and what time it is where you are. I love hearing from our global community, and now, settle in. Let the stress and noise of the modern world fade away. Close your eyes if you wish. Let us travel back through the mists of time. Back 500 years, back to a world before Spanish conquest, before gunpowder reached these mountains, to a time when the Inca Empire was at the height of its power. Let us climb the stone steps to Machu Picchu and discover what life was truly like in this ancient mountain city. This is a story of engineering genius, of daily rituals, of agriculture on impossible slopes, and of a people who saw themselves as children of the sun. This is the story of life inside the walls of Machu Picchu, Part 1, The Discovery and the MYSTRYB. For we can understand life in Machu Picchu, we must first understand the mystery that surrounds it. For this is a city that was lost to the world for 400 years. A city whose very purpose remains debated to this day. The modern story of Machu Picchu begins on July 24th, 1911. On that day, an American historian named Hiram Bingham was making his way up a steep mountain trail in the Peruvian Andes. He was searching for Vilcabamba, the legendary last refuge of the Inca emperors after the Spanish. Conquest. Bingham was not the first outsider to see Machu Picchu. Local farmers knew of the ruins. A few adventurous souls had visited before him, but Bingham was the first to recognize what he had found and to bring it to the world's attention. His local guide, a Quechua farmer named Melchor Artiga, led him up a trail so steep that in places they had to crawl on hands and knees. After hours of climbing through dense jungle, they emerged onto a high ridge. What Bingham saw took his breath away. Emerging from the jungle vegetation were walls of white granite, perfectly fitted together without mortar. There were temples, houses, terraces, and stairways, all built from stone blocks, so precisely cut that a knife blade could not fit between them. Bingham initially believed he had found Vilcabamba. He hadn't. That city lay elsewhere. What he had found was something even more extraordinary. A virtually intact Inca city that had been abandoned so suddenly and so completely that it was as if its inhabitants had simply vanished into the mist. Bingham would spend years excavating and studying the site. He would write books that would make Machu Picchu famous around the world. But for all his work, many mysteries remain. We do not know for certain what the Incas themselves called this city. Machu Picchu means old mountain in Quechua, but that was the local name for the peak, not necessarily the city. The Incas left no written records because they had no writing system. What we know comes from Spanish chronicles written after the conquest. from archaeological evidence, and from the oral traditions of the Quechua people. The descendants of the Incas? We do not know exactly when Machu Picchu was built, though most scholars now believe it was constructed around 1450 AD, during the reign of the Emperor Pachacuti, the ruler who transformed the Inca state from a small kingdom into a vast empire. We do not know exactly why it was built. Was it a royal estate, a summer palace for the emperor? Was it a sacred religious site, a place of pilgrimage? Was it a military fortress? Was it a refuge, a last redoubt for the nobility if the empire fell? Most likely, it was all of these things. Machu Picchu appears to have been a multi-purpose site, partly royal estate, partly religious center, partly agricultural station, partly administrative hub. What we do know is that Machu Picchu was never conquered by the Spanish. When the Spanish conquistadors arrived in Peru in 1532 and destroyed the Inca Empire, Machu Picchu was either already abandoned or was deliberately evacuated and hidden. The Spanish never found it. The great stone city, perched high above the Urubamba River Valley, simply faded from memory, swallowed by the jungle. For 400 years, the jungle slowly reclaimed it. Trees grew between the buildings. Vines covered the walls. Terraces collapsed, but the stones remained, waiting to tell their story. Today, Machu Picchu is one of the most famous archaeological sites in the world, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, one of the new 7 wonders of the world. Over 1 million tourists visit it every year, making the pilgrimage that we are about to make now in our imaginations. But let us turn back the clock. Let us see Machu Picchu not as a ruin but as a living city. Let us walk its streets when they were filled with people, when smoke rose from its houses, when the terraces were green with crops, when priests climbed to its highest temple to greet the rising sun. Let us discover what it was like to live inside the walls of this ancient mountain city. Part 2. The location, building a city in the SK. Understand life in Machu Picchu. We must first understand where it is and why anyone would choose to build a city in such an impossibly difficult location. Machu Picchu sits on a mountain ridge at an elevation of nearly 8,000 feet, about 2,430 meters above sea level. It is located in the cloud forest zone of the eastern Andes, on the edge where the high mountains give way to the Amazon basin below. The city is built on a narrow saddle between 2 peaks, Machu Picchu Old Mountain to the south and Huayna Picchu Young Mountain to the north. On 3 sides, the land drops away in sheer cliffs of 1,000 feet or more down to the Urubamba River, which curves around the mountain in a tight horseshoe bend. This location is spectacularly beautiful and spectacularly impractical. It is far from any major Inca cities. The nearest large settlement was Cusco, the Inca capital, about 50 miles to the southeast, but those 50 miles include some of the most rugged terrain in the Andes. The climate is challenging. Machu Picchu sits at the altitude where clouds form. For much of the year, the city is literally inside the clouds. Morning mist is a daily occurrence. The rainy season, from November to March, brings torrential downpours. The city receives about 75 inches of rain per year. The slopes are steep. There is almost no flat ground naturally available. Every building site, every terrace, every street had to be carved out of the mountainside or built up with massive stone retaining walls. So why here? Why build a city in such a difficult location? The answer lies in Inca religion and cosmology. For the Inca mountains were sacred. They were wokas, holy places inhabited by spirits. The highest peaks were seen as closest to the gods, particularly to Inti, the sun god, the supreme deity of the Inca pantheon. Machu Picchu's location was carefully chosen for its spiritual significance. The site is surrounded by sacred peaks. To the east rises Machu Picchu, its distinctive sugarloaf shape visible for miles. To the south and west are other peaks, all of which were venerated as sacred mountains. The site also has remarkable astronomical alignments. The Intihuatana stone, the hitching post of the sun, is positioned so that, at the winter solstice, June 21st, in the southern hemisphere, the sun stands almost directly above it, casting no shadow. At the spring and autumn equinoxes, the sun rises directly behind certain peaks, as viewed from specific buildings. These alignments were not accidents. The Inca were master astronomers. They used the movements of the sun, moon, and stars to regulate their agricultural calendar, their religious festivals, and the entire rhythm of life in their empire. But spiritual significance alone does not explain Machu Picchu. The site also had strategic advantages. Its location made it almost impossible to attack. There was only one practical entrance, easily defended. The cliffs made surprise attack impossible. An enemy army would see the city high above them, an impossible fortress in the sky. The location also gave the city control over the region. From Machu Picchu, the Inca could monitor the valleys below and the Inca road that ran along the Urubamba River. This was the main route from Cusco to the tropical lowlands, a vital artery of the empire. And finally, the region around Machu Picchu was agriculturally productive. The cloud forest zone has reliable rainfall, fertile soil, and a climate suitable for crops that could not be grown in the cold highlands around. Cusco, Machu Picchu, could grow coca leaves, used in religious ceremonies and as a mild stimulant. It could grow a variety of fruits, and with the extensive terracing the Inca built, it could grow maize, potatoes, and other staples. Building a city here was a monumental challenge, but for the Inca, it was worth it. They would create something that would endure for centuries, a testament to their engineering skill and their devotion to their gods. The construction of Machu Picchu was a feat of engineering that still amazes modern architects and engineers. The Inca had to solve problems that would challenge even today's builders, and they did it without modern technology, without iron tools, and without the wheel. The first challenge was the terrain. The mountain ridge was not naturally level. It sloped steeply. In some places, there was solid bedrock. In others, there was only soil and loose rock that would not support heavy buildings. The Inca solution was to create a series of terraces, essentially giant steps carved into the mountainside. They would dig down to bedrock where possible, where the slope was too steep. They would build massive retaining walls of stone and fill behind them with carefully layered materials, large stones at the bottom for drainage, then smaller stones, then gravel, then soil. This created stable, level platforms on which they could build. It also created a sophisticated drainage system. With so much rainfall, drainage was critical. If water accumulated, it would undermine the foundations and cause landslides. The Inca built a network of drainage channels throughout the city. Water from rain and from natural springs was carefully directed into stone channels that carried it away from the buildings and down the mountain. Some estimates suggest that 60% of the construction effort at Machu Picchu went into creating the terraces and drainage systems that invisible foundation that makes the visible city possible. The stones themselves are a marvel. The Inca quarried granite from sites around Machu Picchu. They selected stones carefully, looking for pieces that already had natural shapes close to what they needed. Then came the incredibly labor-intensive work of shaping the stones. The Inca had copper and bronze tools, but these are too soft to cut granite effectively. Instead, they used a technique of hammering and grinding with harder stones. They would use river cobbles of basalt or other hard stone as hammers, pecking away at the granite bit by bit. For fine shaping, they would grind the surface with sand and water. A single block might take weeks or months to shape, but the result was precision that is almost unbelievable. The most impressive walls at Machu Picchu are built of polygonal blocks, each with multiple sides, each fitting perfectly with its neighbors. The joints are so tight that even after 500 years of earthquakes and weather, you cannot slip a knife blade between the stones. The Inca did this without mortar. The weight and friction of the stones hold them together. This actually makes the walls more earthquake resistant than mortared walls would be. The stones can shift slightly during an earthquake and then settle back into place, whereas mortared joints would crack and fail. Moving the stones was another challenge. Some blocks weigh several tons. The Inca had no wheels and no draft animals strong enough to pull such weights. They had llamas, but llamas cannot pull heavy loads and are too small to serve as draft animals. The Inca solution was brute force and ingenuity. They used large numbers of workers pulling on ropes to drag stones on log rollers or wooden sledges. For uphill movement, they used ramps and levers. They might move a heavy stone only a few feet per day, but they were patient and they had large labor forces. The labor force was provided through a system called mitpavis, was a form of taxation in which every able-bodied adult in the empire owed the state a certain amount of labor each year. Men might be required to work on construction projects, road building, or military service. Women would weave cloth for the state or work in stone-toned agricultural fields. This system allowed the Inca to mobilize thousands of workers for projects like Machu Picchu. These were not slaves, but citizens fulfilling their obligations to the state. In return, the state provided them with food, shelter, and clothing while they worked. At its peak, the construction of Machu Picchu might have involved several thousand workers. They would have camped in temporary shelters around the site. They would have been organized into work crews, each with specific tasks, some quarrying stone, others shaping it, others moving it into place, others building the terraces, others constructing the buildings. The construction would have taken years, perhaps decades, but the result was a city built to last for eternity. A city where every stone was placed with precision and purpose. This city was not built randomly. It had a plan, a layout that reflected Inca cosmology and social hierarchy. Let us now walk through that city and explore its different zones. Part 3. The layout of the site Machu Picchu was not a large city by modern standards. At its peak, it probably housed no more than 750 to 1,000 people, though some estimates go as low as 300 and others as high as 1,500. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in careful planning and symbolic meaning. The city is divided into two main sectors, the agricultural zone and the urban zone. Between them runs a long plaza, and dividing the urban zone itself is a series of walls and terraces that separate the sacred from the secular, the noble from the common. Let us begin with the agricultural zone. for this was the foundation of life in Machu Picchu. The agricultural terraces, called Andeans in Spanish, are one of the most striking features of the site. There are about 40 major terraces on the eastern and southern flanks of the ridge. Stepping down the mountainside in a series of giant green stairs, these terraces were not just decorative. They were essential for feeding the city's population. Each terrace is retained by a stone wall, sometimes 15 feet high or more. Behind the wall is the layered fill we mentioned earlier, stones for drainage at the bottom, then gravel, then topsoil. The terraces created microclimates. The lower terraces, closer to the valley floor, were warmer. The upper terraces were cooler. This allowed the Inca to grow a variety of crops at different altitudes on the same mountainside. The terraces also prevented erosion. Without them, the steep slopes would have been washed away by the heavy rains. The terraces captured the rainwater, slowed it down, allowed it to soak into the soil rather than running off in destructive torrents. Walking among these terraces in the morning, you would have seen men and women working with foot plows called takla, turning the soil. You would have seen others planting seeds or harvesting crops. You would have heard the sound of voices singing work songs, for the Inca often sang while they worked, using rhythm to coordinate their efforts. Moving up from the agricultural zone, we come to the main plaza, a long, narrow, open space that runs roughly north-south. This was the social and ceremonial heart of the city. Here, the population would have gathered for public ceremonies, for religious festivals, for announcements from the authorities. The plaza is where the terraces end and the buildings begin. On the eastern side of the plaza is the urban sector, rising in a series of terraces and containing most of the residential and administrative buildings. The urban sector is divided into two main areas by a long wall and a moat-like ditch. This division is not just physical, but social and spiritual. On the east side, higher up the slope, is the Hanan or upper sector. This was the sacred and noble zone. Here we find the most important temples, the finest buildings, the residences of the elite. On the west side, lower down, is the Hurin or lower sector. This was where the common people lived and worked. The buildings here are simpler, the stonework less refined. This division reflects the fundamental principle of Inca cosmology, the division between Hanan, upper, superior, sacred, and Hurin, lower, inferior, profane. The Inca saw the world as divided into complementary but unequal halves, and they built their cities to reflect this worldview. Let us explore the Hanan sector first, for this is where the most impressive architecture is found. The centerpiece of the sacred zone is the Temple of the Sun, also called the Torreon. This is a semicircular building of exquisite stonework built around a natural rock outcrop. The curved wall is made of beautifully cut and fitted stones, similar to the finest architecture in Cusco. The Temple of the Sun has two windows positioned to align with the sun. At the June solstice, the winter solstice in the southern hemisphere, the sun's rays shine through one window and illuminate the rock at the center of the temple. At the December solstice, the sun's rays enter through the other window. This was not coincidental. The Temple of the Sun was an astronomical observatory and a place for solar worship. The Inca believed that their emperors were descendants of Inti, the sun god. The emperor was called the Sapa Inca, the only Inca, and he was considered to be divine. The son of the sun. Below the Temple of the Sun is a cave with finely worked stonework. This is sometimes called the royal tomb, though no burials have been found here. The Inca considered caves to be sacred entrances to the underworld, the realm of the dead. The juxtaposition of the sun temple above and the cave below may represent the journey of the sun, rising in the sky by day, descending into the underworld at night. Near the Temple of the Sun is the Royal Palace, a complex of finely built rooms arranged around a private courtyard. This was probably the residence of the emperor or the local governor when they visited Machu Picchu. The rooms are small by modern standards, but they are built with remarkable care. The walls are of perfectly fitted stone. The roof would have been thatched with ichu grass, tied to wooden beams. Inside, there would have been few furnishings. The Inca did not use chairs or tables. They sat on the floor on woven red mats or on low stone benches built into the walls. They slept on the floor on piles of blankets and furs, but the simplicity of the furnishings belied the wealth and power of the occupants. The walls would have been hung with finely woven textiles in brilliant colors. There would have been ceramics, tools, and ornaments of gold, silver, and precious stones. There would have been attendants, servants, and guards. The most sacred spot in all of Machu Picchu is probably the Intihuatana, the hitching post of the sun. This is a carved stone pillar standing on a pyramidal base at the highest point of the urban sector. The Intihuatana is a single piece of granite, carved in situ from the bedrock of the mountain. It is oriented precisely to the cardinal directions. At the equinoxes, the sun stands almost directly above the pillar at noon, casting almost no shadow. The Inca believed that the sun needed to be symbolically tied to the earth at the solstices to prevent it from disappearing. The Intihuatana was used in ceremonies for this purpose. Priests would perform rituals here, perhaps symbolically tying the sun to the stone with a golden cord. Similar stones existed in other Inca cities, but almost all were destroyed by the Spanish, who saw them as instruments of pagan idolatry. The Intihuatana at Machu Picchu survived because the Spanish never found the city. It is one of the few intact examples of this sacred Inca monument. Other important buildings in the Henan sector include the Temple of the Three Windows, a building with 3 large trapezoidal windows looking out over the plaza and the mountains beyond. The 3 windows may represent the 3 levels of the Inca cosmos: the upper world, Henan, Pasha, the world of the living K Pasha, and the underworld, Uku Pasha. Or they may represent the 3 caves from which, according to Inca mythology, the founders of the Inca dynasty emerged in the distant past. The sacred plaza, adjacent to the Temple of the Three Windows, contains several buildings that were probably used for religious ceremonies. One of these, the principal temple, has walls of massive, perfectly fitted stones and niches that may have held idols or offerings. Now let us descend to the Huron sector, the common quarter. Here the architecture is less refined, but no less interesting. The buildings are grouped into complexes called canchas, rectangular enclosures containing multiple small buildings around a central courtyard. These canchas were residential and workshop areas. Extended families or work groups would have lived in these compounds, sharing the courtyard for communal activities. The stonework here is simpler, rather than the precisely fitted polygonal blocks of the sacred zone. The walls are built of smaller, more regular stones, fitted together with some small gaps filled with mud, mortar, and clay. But even here, the construction is solid. These buildings have stood for 500 years. Inside these common dwellings, life would have been crowded and simple. Rooms were small, often just 10 by 15 feet. Families of 4 or 5 or more would have shared such a space. There were no windows, only the door and perhaps some small openings near the roof for ventilation. The floor would have been of packed earth, covered with mats. There would have been a hearth for cooking and warmth, though cooking was often done outside in the courtyard. Smoke would have filled the room, escaping slowly through the thatch roof and the ventilation holes. The air would have smelled of wood smoke, of cooking food, of guinea pigs, which the Inca kept as a food source, of human sweat and breath. Possessions would have been few. Some ceramic pots for cooking and storage, some woven baskets, some tools, stone knives, bronze needles, wooden spindles, some blankets and clothing, perhaps a few ornaments. Despite the simplicity, there was a certain comfort to be found here. The stone walls kept the interior cool in the day and retained some warmth at night. The thick thatch roof kept out the rain, and the community provided security and social connection. Let us now consider one of the most important and often overlooked aspects of the city, the water system. Part 4. The water system, engineering, MRVL. Water was sacred to the Inca. It was a source of life, a means of purification, and a symbol of the flow of time and energy through the world. At Machu Picchu, the management of water was both a practical necessity and a religious act. The city sits in one of the wettest parts of the Andes. It receives about 75 inches of rain per year. But despite all this rain, finding a reliable source of clean water for daily use was a challenge. Rainwater needed to be collected and directed. Excess water needed to be drained away to prevent flooding and erosion. The Inca solution was brilliant. They identified a natural spring on the slopes of Machu Picchu mountain, about a quarter-mile from the city. This spring provided a year-round flow of clean water from this spring. The Inca built a stone channel that carried the water to the city. This channel, called the main aqueduct, is a masterpiece of hydraulic engineering. It maintains a constant, gentle slope, dropping just enough to keep the water flowing, but not so much that the flow becomes too fast and causes erosion. The channel is carved from stone, or built of fitted stone blocks. It is about 6 inches wide and 6 inches deep. It flows for about 2,500 feet from the spring to the first fountain in the city, dropping about 100 feet in elevation. At the edge of the urban sector, the main aqueduct feeds into a system of 16 fountains arranged in a descending series. Each fountain is a small architectural gem, a stone basin with a spout, often set into a niche in a wall. Seawater flows from the first fountain to the second, from the second to the third, and so on, descending through the city. Each fountain is located in a different residential area, providing water access to the population. The placement of the fountains was not random. The first fountain, receiving the freshest water directly from the main aqueduct, is located next to the royal palace in the Henan sector. This ensured that the elite had access to the cleanest water. The subsequent fountains serve the population in descending order of social rank. By the time the water reaches the lower fountains in the Huron sector, it has been used for drinking, cooking, and washing by the people living at each level above. This sounds unsanitary by modern standards, but the system worked remarkably well. The fountains were designed so that water flowed continuously and did not stand still, which limited bacterial growth. The water was used for drinking only after it came from the spout, not from the basin where it collected. And cultural practices, which we will discuss later, ensured that the water was treated with respect and kept as clean as possible. The fountains were social centers. Women would have gathered here daily to fill their ceramic water jars. They would have talked, shared news and gossip, and built community while they waited their turn at the spout. Men might have come to the fountains to wash after working in the fields. Children would have played nearby, though they would have been warned not to waste the water or pollute it. The largest and most impressive fountain is the first one, called the Fountain of the Inca's Bath. This is located next to the Temple of the Sun and the Royal Palace. It has a large stone basin and a carefully shaped spout. This fountain may have been reserved for the exclusive use of the emperor and the highest nobility in Inca culture. Water was not just a practical resource, but a spiritual one. Springs were considered sacred, the dwelling places of water spirits. The act of bringing water from the mountain spring to the city was a kind of sacred contract, a relationship between the human and natural worlds. The Inca performed ceremonies at springs and fountains. They made offerings of coca leaves, maize beer, chicha, and other precious items. They prayed for continued abundance of water, for the health of the crops, for the well-being of the community. Beyond the fountains, for daily use, Machu Picchu also had elaborate drainage systems. Every courtyard, every terrace, every plaza had channels to carry away rainwater. These channels are built into the paving, carved from stone, or made of fitted stone pieces. The drainage systems are so effective that even in the heaviest rains, the city does not flood. Water is quickly channeled into the main drainage lines and carried down the mountain. This attention to drainage was essential. Without it, the terraces would have become waterlogged and collapsed. The buildings would have been undermined. The city would have been uninhabitable. Modern engineers, who have studied Machu Picchu, estimate that about 60% of the city's construction is actually underground. Terraces, drainage systems, and foundations. What we see above ground, the temples, the houses, the plazas, is just the visible tip of a massive engineering project. This hidden infrastructure is what has allowed Machu Picchu to survive for 500 years. Many other Inca sites have collapsed or eroded away, but Machu Picchu, with its superior drainage and foundation engineering, remains largely intact now that we understand the physical layout and infrastructure of the city. Let us turn to the people who lived here. Who were they? What was their daily life like? What did they eat? What did they wear? What did they do from sunrise to sunset? Part 5. The people of Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu was not a city of equals. Inca society was highly stratified, and this hierarchy was reflected in every aspect of life in the mountain city. The morning passes. The sun climbs higher. It is warmer now, but not hot. At this altitude and in the cloud forest climate, the temperature is comfortable, usually between 60 and 75 degrees Fahrenheit during the day. Around mid-morning, Kusi arrives with a small ceramic pot of chicha, the maize beer that is the staple drink of the Inca. Tupac and his children take a break. They sit on the terrace wall and drink the chicha, which is slightly sour and refreshing. Kusi also brings some roasted maize kernels and a small piece of charqui, dried llama meat. They eat, looking out over the Urubamba River far below, watching the clouds form in the valley. After the break, they return to work. Tupac continues with his takla. His wife and older daughter begin to harvest some of the maize that is ready, carefully removing the ears and placing them in woven baskets. The work continues until mid-afternoon. Then Tupac and his family return to the city. They carry the baskets of harvested maize. Some of this will be kept for their own use. The rest will be delivered to the state storehouses. Their contribution to the Mita obligation Back in the city, Tupac has free time. He spends some of it maintaining his tools, sharpening the point of his tackler with a stone. He spends some time with his neighbors in the courtyard, talking about the work, about the weather, about community news. There is news from Cusco, brought by a Chasqui messenger runner who arrived today. The emperor is planning a campaign against a rebellious province to the south. There will be a call for soldiers from the Mita levy. Some men from Machu Picchu will be required to go. This news causes concern. Military service is dangerous, and it takes men away from their families and fields for months or even years. Tupac hopes he will not be chosen, but he knows he will go if called. It is his duty to the state. As the sun begins to lower, Kusi prepares the evening meal. This is the main meal of the day. She cooks a stew in a ceramic pot over the fire. The stew contains potatoes, quinoa, some vegetables from the terrace, and a small piece of llama meat. She seasons it with salt and oji, a hot pepper. The family eats together, again squatting around the fire. The food is simple but nourishing. They eat until they are full, using the ceramic bowls and their fingers. After the meal, as twilight falls, the family gathers with other families in the courtyard. Someone has brought out a pinculo, a flute made from bone or wood. Someone else has a small drum. They begin to play. The children dance and play. The adults talk and laugh. This is one of the few times in the day for relaxation and socializing. As darkness falls, the activities wind down. There is no artificial light except small oil lamps or torches, which are used sparingly. Most people go to bed soon after dark. Tupac and his family retire to their house. They lay out their blankets on the floor. They huddle together for warmth. The fire has burned down to embers, providing a little heat, but also filling the room with smoke. Outside, the night sounds of the mountain can be heard, the wind in the thatch, the distant call of a night bird, the sound of water flowing in the drainage channels. Tupac closes his eyes. He is tired from the day's work, a good, honest tiredness. Tomorrow will be much the same. Wake before dawn, greet the rising sun, eat, work the terraces, eat, work more, eat, sleep. This is the rhythm of life in Machu Picchu, as it has been for generations, as it will be for generations to come, or so he believes. But the future is more uncertain than Tupac knows. Even now, far to the north, strange bearded men in metal armor are arriving in ships larger than any the Inca have ever seen. In a few decades, these Spanish conquistadors will destroy the Inca Empire, but Machu Picchu will escape their notice, hidden in its mountain refuge, waiting to be rediscovered centuries later. For now, though in this moment, Tupac sleeps peacefully in his stone house, surrounded by his family, secure in his city in the clouds. Part 7. Food and agricur, rife in Machu Picchu. Like life everywhere in the pre-modern world, revolved around food. Growing it, storing it, preparing it, and eating it consumed most of people's time and energy. Let us explore in detail how the people of Machu Picchu fed themselves. The Inca had developed one of the most sophisticated agricultural systems in the ancient world. They had to. They lived in one of the most challenging environments on Earth for farming. High altitude, steep slopes, unpredictable weather, and thin soils. Their solution was the terrace system we have already described. These terraces allowed them to farm on slopes that would otherwise be too steep. They also created different microclimates, allowing the cultivation of crops at different altitudes. But the terraces alone were not enough. The Inca also developed remarkable expertise in plant breeding, creating hundreds of varieties of potatoes, maize, quinoa, and other crops, each adapted to specific growing conditions. The most important crop in the Andes has always been the potato. The potato is native to the Andes, and the Inca cultivated dozens of varieties. At the higher, colder altitudes around Cusco, potatoes were the staple food. At Machu Picchu, which sits at a lower, warmer altitude in the cloud forest zone, maize corn became the primary staple. The terraces at Machu Picchu were perfect for growing maize. The climate was warm enough, the soil was rich, and the rainfall was abundant. Maize was not just food. It was sacred. It was central to Inca religion and ritual. Maize was transformed into chicha, the beer that was consumed in vast quantities at religious festivals and used as an offering to the gods. The Inca grew maize in many colors: white, yellow, red, purple, black, and multicolored varieties. Different varieties were used for different purposes. Some were best for eating fresh. Others were better for drying and storage. Some were specifically grown for making chicha. The agricultural calendar at Machu Picchu would have been dictated by the seasons. In the southern hemisphere, the rainy season runs from November to March. This is the growing season. The dry season, from April to October, is the harvest time and the season for ceremonies and festivals. In November, as the rains begin, the farmers would have prepared the terraces, breaking up the soil with their tackler foot plows. They would have planted the maize seeds, poking holes in the soil and dropping in a few kernels, then covering them over. The rains would make the seeds germinate and grow. Throughout the rainy season, farmers would have tended the crops, weeding, hilling up soil around the plants, and protecting them from birds and other pests. By April or May, the maize would be ready to harvest. This was a time of community effort. Families would help each other with the harvest, working together to bring in the crop before the dry season progressed too far. The harvest was also a time of celebration. There would be festivals with music, dancing, and abundant chicha. The Inca believed that the crops were gifts from the earth goddess, Pachamama, and from the sun god Inti. They would make offerings of thanks, burning coca leaves, pouring chicha onto the ground, and sacrificing llamas. After the harvest, the maize had to be processed and stored. Some of it would be eaten fresh, boiled, or roasted, but most of it had to be preserved for use throughout the year. The Inca used several preservation techniques. One of the simplest was drying. Ears of maize would be spread out on mats in the sun to dry. Once completely dry, the kernels could be stored almost indefinitely in sealed ceramic jars or in woven baskets. Another important crop was quinoa, a grain native to the Andes. Quinoa is highly nutritious, high in protein and containing all essential amino acids. It grows well at high altitudes and in poor soils where other crops would fail. At Machu Picchu, quinoa would have been grown on some of the higher, cooler terraces. It was used to make porridge, soups, and a fermented drink similar to chicha. Potatoes were also grown at Machu Picchu, though they were more important at higher, colder sites. The Inca had a remarkable method of preserving potatoes called chuno. They would spread potatoes out on the ground during the cold season, allowing them to freeze at night and thaw during the day. After several days of this, they would trample the potatoes to squeeze out the water, then dry them in the sun. The result was Chuno freeze-dried potatoes that could be stored for years. When needed, they would be soaked in water and cooked. Chuno was an essential food for the Inca armies on campaign and for communities facing famine. Other crops grown at Machu Picchu included beans, several varieties, often grown together with maize, squash, and gourds. Also grown with maize in the Three Sisters companion planting system. The sacred plant, grown on special terraces, peppers, both sweet and hot varieties, tomatoes and tomatillos, avocados. In the warmest areas, various herbs and greens. The Inca also grew crops that were not food. They cultivated cotton for weaving. They grew tobacco and other plants used in medicines and rituals. They maintained groves of trees for wood and for fruits. Animal protein came primarily from domesticated llamas and alpacas. These camelids were the only large domesticated animals in the Americas before the arrival of Europeans. Llamas were kept primarily as pack animals. They could carry loads of up to 70 pounds and could travel long distances in rough terrain. Their wool was used for making cloth. Their dung was used as fertilizer and fuel, and they were occasionally slaughtered for meat. Alpacas were kept primarily for their extremely fine wool, softer and warmer than sheep's wool. Alpaca wool was especially prized, used to make the finest textiles. Both llamas and alpacas were sacred animals. Sacrificing them was a significant religious act. Pure white llamas and alpacas were especially valued for sacrifice to the gods. The Inca also raised guinea pigs, called kai. These small rodents were kept in homes, living in corners or under benches. They fed on vegetable scraps and were a source of meat. Guinea pig is still eaten in Peru today, usually roasted whole. Hunting supplemented the diet. The mountains around Machu Picchu were home to deer viscachas, a type of rodent, and various birds. Hunting was controlled by the state. There were periodic great hunts, called chacu, where entire communities would participate, driving game animals into enclosures where they could be selectively killed or captured. The Urubamba River, far below Machu Picchu, provided fish. Fishermen would have used nets, hooks, and spears to catch trout and other freshwater fish. Preparing food was primarily women's work. Cooking was done in ceramic pots over an open fire. There were no ovens, no frying pans, no sophisticated cooking equipment. The typical meal consisted of a stew or soup containing grains, maize or quinoa, vegetables, and if available, some meat. This would be cooked for hours over a low fire, becoming a thick, nutritious porridge. Maize was also eaten in other forms. Fresh maize could be boiled or roasted. Dried maize kernels could be parched and eaten as a snack. Maize flour could be made into flatbreads or dumplings. Potatoes were boiled or baked in the embers of the fire. Sometimes they were mashed or made into a kind of potato cake. Food was served in ceramic bowls. There were no individual plates. People ate from the communal pot, using their fingers, wooden spoons, or pieces of flatbread to scoop up the food. Chicha, the maize beer, was the universal drink. Making chicha was a complex process. Maize kernels were moistened and allowed to germinate slightly, which converted the starches to sugars. Then they were boiled with water and allowed to ferment for several days. The result was a slightly alcoholic beverage with a sour, refreshing taste. Chicha was drunk daily, by everyone from children to elders. It was nutritious, providing calories and vitamins, and its mild alcohol content made it safer to drink than untreated water. Chicha was also sacred. It was poured out as an offering to the gods at every ceremony. The state maintained large-scale chicha production facilities. Some of the Atlacuna, the chosen women, spent their days brewing chicha for ritual use. Food storage was a critical concern. The Inca had no refrigeration, no canning, no modern preservation methods. They relied on drying, smoking, and salting to preserve food. The state maintained large storehouses called calca. These were stone buildings with excellent ventilation, located in cool, dry locations. They stored dried maize, chuño, dried meat siaki, the origin of our word, jerky, dried beans, and other preserved foods. These storehouses served multiple purposes. They were insurance against famine in years of poor harvests. They supplied the army when soldiers were on campaign. They provided food for workers on mitter labor projects. And they allowed the state to redistribute food from productive areas to less productive ones, maintaining stability across the empire at Machu Picchu. There are several groups of calca buildings on the hillsides above the city. Archaeological analysis of these structures suggests they were used to store a variety of foods and other goods. The Inca diet, while simple by modern standards, was actually quite healthy. It was high in whole grains, vegetables, and legumes. Meat was consumed in moderation. Processed foods and sugar were unknown. The biggest nutritional challenges came from the limitations of the high-altitude environment. Certain vitamins and nutrients were hard to obtain. The Inca compensated by eating a wide variety of foods and by trading with lowland regions for fruits, coca, and other products that could not be grown in the highlands. Overall, the Inca agricultural system at Machu Picchu was a remarkable achievement. It supported a stable population in a challenging environment. It produced surplus food that could be stored against hard times or used to support non-agricultural activities like construction, craft production, and religious ceremonies. This agricultural abundance was the foundation for everything else in Inca society: the cities, the temples, the armies, the art, the empire itself. Without the food grown on the terraces at places like Machu Picchu, none of it would have been possible. Part 8. Clothing and crafts. Food was the most basic necessity of life in Machu Picchu. Clothing came a close second. In the variable climate of the high Andes, proper clothing was essential for survival. But clothing was more than just protection from the elements. It was a marker of identity, status, and ethnicity. The Inca did not have cotton growing at the altitude of Machu Picchu. Instead, they relied on wool from their domesticated camelids, llamas, and alpacas. Llama wool is coarse and durable, suitable for outer garments and bags. Alpaca wool is much finer and softer, used for higher quality clothing. The finest wool of all came from the vicuna, a wild relative of the alpaca. Vicuna wool is incredibly soft and warm, finer than cashmere. In Inca society, vicuna wool was reserved for the nobility and especially for the emperor himself. Common people were forbidden from wearing it. Processing wool into cloth was a long and labor-intensive process, and it was primarily women's work. First, the wool had to be collected. Llamas and alpacas were sheared once a year, usually in the dry season. The wool was sorted by quality and color. Natural colors ranged from white to cream to brown to black. Then the wool had to be cleaned. Women would wash it in the fountains or in the river, using natural soaps made from certain plants. They would spread it out to dry in the sun. Next came spinning. This was done with a simple drop spindle. a stick with a whirl-a-weighted disc at one end. The spinner would draw out fibers from a clump of raw wool, attach them to the spindle, and set the spindle spinning. As it spun, it twisted the fibers into yarn. Spinning was skilled work that took years to master. The quality of the finished cloth depended largely on the quality of the yarn. The finest spinners could produce yarn so thin and even that cloth woven from it was as soft as silk. Women spun constantly. They spun while walking, while talking, while watching children, during every spare moment. A skilled spinner could produce enough yarn in a day to weave several inches of cloth. The yarn was often dyed before weaving. The Inca had a sophisticated knowledge of natural dyes. They used cochineal insects to produce brilliant reds and pinks, indigo plants for blues, various plants for yellows, greens and oranges, minerals and clays. For other colors, the dyed yarn was then ready for weaving. Inca weaving was done on a backstrap loom, a simple but versatile device. One end of the loom was tied to a post or tree. The other end was attached to a strap that went around the weaver's back. By leaning back, the weaver could control the tension of the threads. Weaving was incredibly skilled work. The finest Inca textiles were as complex as any cloth produced anywhere in the world. They featured intricate geometric designs, often with symbolic meanings related to Inca cosmology and mythology. The most basic garment for men was the tunic, called an This was a simple rectangular piece of cloth with a slit for the head and holes for the arms. It reached to about the knees. Men also wore a breechcloth and sometimes a cloak for warmth. On their feet, they wore sandals made from leather or woven plant fibers, or they went barefoot. Women wore a long dress called an anak, which was a rectangular piece of cloth wrapped around the body and held in place by a woven belt. Over this, they wore a shawl or cloak fastened at the front with a decorative pin called a tupu, like men. Women often went barefoot or wore simple sandals. The color and quality of cloth indicated social status. Common people wore simple tunics and dresses of natural colored llama wool, perhaps with a few simple stripes or patterns. Nobles wore finer cloth of alpaca wool, dyed in bright colors and woven with complex designs. The designs were not just decorative, but indicated the wearer's ethnic group, home region, and rank within the social hierarchy. The emperor's clothing was the finest of all. His tunic was woven from vicuna wool so fine that it took a skilled weaver months to produce a single garment. It was adorned with gold ornaments, jewels, and feathers from tropical birds. On his head, the emperor wore the mascapacha, a fringe of red tassels made from vicuna wool and gold thread. This was the crown of the Inca, the ultimate symbol of imperial power. Clothing was so important in Inca society that it was used as a form of currency and tribute. Provinces were required to send quantities of cloth to the state as part of their tax obligations. The state maintained storehouses filled with cloth. This cloth was redistributed to soldiers, to workers on mita projects, and as gifts to reward loyal service. Giving someone a fine tunic was a great honor. Taking someone's tunic away was a serious punishment and humiliation. Besides weaving, the people of Machu Picchu practiced many other crafts. Pottery making was an important skill. The Inca made a wide variety of ceramic vessels, large storage jars, cooking pots, serving bowls, drinking cups, and more. Pottery was made by hand, without a potter's wheel, which the Inca did not have. Clay was formed by coiling, pinching, and molding. The vessels were then fired in open pit kilns. Inca pottery was typically quite standardized. The shapes and decorations followed strict patterns that varied little across the empire. This standardization was probably encouraged by the state, as it made it easier to collect and store tribute goods and to distribute rations. Metalworking was another important craft, though metal was relatively rare in the Inca world. The Inca had copper, bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, gold, and silver. They did not have iron. Ironworking was unknown in the Americas before European contact. Metal was used for tools, chisels, knives, agricultural implements, for weapons, spear points, axe heads, for ornaments, pins, bracelets, ear spools, and for ritual objects. Gold and silver were considered sacred, the sweat of the sun and the tears of the moon respectively. They were reserved primarily for religious use and for the emperor and the highest nobility. Metalworkers at Machu Picchu would have made simple bronze tools and ornaments. The finest metalwork, the gold crowns, the silver ritual vessels. The elaborate jewelry would have been made by specialist craftsmen in Cusco and brought to Machu Picchu as needed. Stone carving was perhaps the craft for which the Inca are most famous. The precisely cut and fitted stones of Machu Picchu are the work of master stonemasons. As we discussed earlier, the Inca shaped stones by pecking and grinding with harder stones. It was slow, patient work, but the results were extraordinary. The finest stone carving was reserved for the most important buildings. The Temple of the Sun at Machu Picchu has walls of beautifully fitted curved stones, a technical achievement that still impresses modern stonemasons. Other crafts practiced at Machu Picchu included basket weaving, using reeds and grasses, rope making, essential for construction and for making bridges, woodworking, for making tools, containers, and other items, creating ornaments and clothing from the colorful feathers of tropical birds, shellworking, making ornaments from shells traded from the coast. All of these crafts were essential to daily life. There were also forms of tribute. Skilled craftspeople owed their labor to the state through the mitre system. A talented weaver might be required to produce a certain amount of cloth for the state each year. A skilled stonemason might be called to work on construction projects. But craftwork was also a source of pride and identity. A well-made pot, a finely woven cloth, a beautifully carved stone. These were achievements that brought status and respect in a society without money, where everything was distributed by the state according to rank and need. The quality of one's work was one of the few ways to demonstrate individual skill and to gain recognition. Now let us turn from the practical crafts to the spiritual life of Machu Picchu. For religion permeated every aspect of existence in this sacred mountain city. Part 9. Religion and ritual for the Inca. Religion was not separate from daily life. It was woven into every activity, every decision, every moment. The world was alive with spirits and powers. Every mountain, every spring, every stone had its own energy, its own spiritual significance. The Inca religious system was complex, with a hierarchy of gods, spirits, and sacred places. At the top was Inti, the sun god, the supreme deity of the empire. The emperor was believed to be Inti's son, making the state itself a religious institution. Below Inti were other major deities. Mama, the moon goddess, Inti's wife and sister, the earth mother, the goddess of fertility and agriculture, Ila, the god of thunder, lightning, and rain. Crucial for farmers, Mama Kocha, the mother of waters, goddess of the sea and fresh water. These Major gods were worshipped at great temples in Cusco and at important sites throughout the empire, including Machu Picchu. But the Inca also believed in countless local spirits and walkers. A walker could be any sacred place or object, a strangely shaped stone, a mountain peak, a spring, a cave, an ancient burial site. The mountains around Machu Picchu were all walkers. The spring that supplied the city's water was a walker. Certain rock outcrops within the city, carved and shaped by the Inca, were walkers. These walkers required regular offerings and rituals. People would leave coca leaves, pour chicha, or make other small offerings when passing a walker. Failing to show proper respect could bring bad luck or anger the spirits. The ritual calendar was determined by astronomical observations and by the agricultural cycle. The Inca divided the year into 12 lunar months, with periodic adjustments to keep the lunar calendar aligned with the solar year. Each month had its own festival and rituals. The most important were Inti Raymi, the festival of the sun, celebrated at the June solstice, winter solstice in the southern hemisphere. This was the most important festival of the year, a time of great celebrations in Cusco and its sacred sites like Machu Picchu, Capac Raymi, celebrated in December at the summer solstice. A festival of initiation for young men, Capac Hatsha, not tied to a specific month, but a practice of child sacrifice carried out to mark important events or to avert disasters, Machu Picchu. The priests would have conducted daily rituals. Each morning, as we described in Tupac's daily routine, everyone would greet the rising sun. But the priests had more elaborate duties. At the Temple of the Sun, priests would have maintained a sacred fire that burned perpetually. They would have made daily offerings of coca leaves and chicha. On important days, they would have sacrificed llamas or alpacas. Animal sacrifice was a central part of Inca religion. The animal, usually a llama or alpaca of a specific color, white for the sun, brown for Pachamama, etc., would be ritually killed. Its heart and other organs would be examined for omens. Its meat would be cooked and shared among the participants in the ritual, a sacred meal that created communion between humans and gods. The most sacred and terrible ritual was human sacrifice, specifically the sacrifice of children in the practice called Copac. This was rare, carried out only in times of great crisis or to mark events of supreme importance, like the death of an emperor. Children, usually between 6 and 15 years old, would be selected from provinces across the empire. They would be brought to Cusco, blessed by the priests, and then taken to high mountain peaks where they would be sacrificed. Several such sacrifices have been found in the high Andes, preserved by the cold and ice. The famous Ice Maiden found on Mount Ampat and the children found on Mount Lula were victims of Capacucha. We do not know if such sacrifices were ever performed at Machu Picchu itself, though it is possible given the site's sacred nature and its proximity to sacred mountains. The priests at Machu Picchu would have included both men and women. High-ranking priests were members of the nobility, often relatives of the emperor. They presided over the most important ceremonies. Lower-ranking priests and priestesses had more mundane duties, maintaining the temples, preparing offerings, conducting minor rituals, interpreting omens. The Aklakuna, the chosen women, also played important religious roles. Some were priestesses dedicated to serving in tea. They maintained the sacred fires, wove cloth for ritual use, and prepared the vast quantities of chicha needed for festivals. Divination was important in Inca religion. The future was not fixed, but could be read in signs and omens. Priests practiced various forms of divination, reading the patterns of coca leaves as they burned, examining the organs of sacrificed animals, observing the behavior of spiders, interpreting dreams before any important decision, starting a war, choosing a day for a wedding, deciding when to plant crops. The omens would be consulted. The Inca also had shamans, called Yakaka or Paco, who communicated with the spirits through trance states, often induced by chewing coca leaves mixed with other psychoactive plants. These shamans could journey to the spirit world and bring back messages from the gods or the spirits of the dead. Death and the afterlife were important in Inca religion. The Inca believed that the dead continued to exist in the underworld, Uchipasha. They needed to be supplied with food, drink, and other offerings, which the living would provide at regular intervals. The bodies of the dead were mummified, if possible. In the dry highlands, this happened naturally. Bodies would be wrapped in cloth and placed in caves or in purpose-built tombs. The mummies of dead emperors were particularly important. They were kept in temples in Cusco, brought out for major festivals, consulted for advice, and treated as if they were still alive. Each dead emperor retained ownership of his lands and palaces. This created a strange situation where the dead emperors collectively owned most of the empire's wealth, while the living emperor had to conquer new territories to have resources of his own. We do not know if there were any royal burials at Machu Picchu. Hiram Bingham found about 150 skeletons at the site when he excavated it, but most of these were probably common people or servants, not nobility. One of the most intriguing aspects of Inca religion was the practice of confession. The Inca believed that sin could cause physical illness. To be cured, one had to confess one's sins to a priest, who would prescribe penances and perform cleansing rituals. Sins included failing to make proper offerings to the gods, disrespecting what, breaking the complex social rules that governed behavior, committing adultery or other sexual transgressions, lying or stealing. For minor sins, the penance might be fasting or ritual bathing. For major sins, it could involve public whipping or other painful punishments. This system of confession and penance reinforced the social order. It made people internalize the rules of society, believing that breaking them would not just bring social punishment, but would anger the gods and bring illness and bad luck. Religion at Machu Picchu, then, was an all-encompassing system that explained the world. Regulated behavior marked the passage of time and connected the people to the cosmos and to the state. It was impossible to separate religious life from any other aspect of life. They were one and the same. Part 10. The end of the WLD. We have walked through the daily life of Machu Picchu at its height. In the early 16th century, when the Inca Empire was at the peak of its power, but this world was about to end, swept away by an invasion from an utterly alien civilization. In 1532, a small force of Spanish conquistadors, led by Francisco Pizarro, arrived in Peru. The Spanish had superior weapons, steel swords, armor, guns, and horses, animals the Inca had never seen. But their greatest weapon was invisible: European diseases, especially smallpox. Smallpox had spread ahead of the Spanish, carried by indigenous traders and travelers. It had reached the Inca Empire before the Spanish themselves arrived. The epidemic was catastrophic. Millions died, including the Emperor Huayna Capac and his designated heir. This threw the empire into chaos. Two of Huayna Capac's sons, Huascar and Atahualpa fought a bitter civil war for the throne. Atahualpa won, but his victory left the empire weakened and divided. It was into this chaotic situation that Pizarro arrived. With audacious cunning, he captured Atahualpa in an ambush at Cajamarca. Though Atahualpa offered a roomful of gold and silver as ransom, Pizarro had him executed and marched on to Cusco. The Inca Empire, for all its size and power, collapsed with astonishing speed. The infrastructure that had made it strong, the roads, the storehouses, the mitter labor system, all depended on centralized authority. When the emperor was killed and Cusco fell, the system fell apart. Some Inca nobles resisted. They retreated to Vilcabamba, a remote mountain stronghold where they maintained a shadow Inca state for several decades. But it was a losing battle. Spanish power, Spanish weapons, and Spanish diseases were overwhelming. What happened to Machu Picchu during this tumultuous time? The honest answer is, we don't know for certain. The Spanish never recorded discovering it. It does not appear in any Spanish chronicles. The city seems to have been abandoned sometime in the mid-16th century, possibly even before the Spanish arrived. Why would the inhabitants abandon such a magnificent city? Several theories have been proposed. One possibility is that Machu Picchu was closely associated with the Emperor Pachacati and his royal lineage. When the empire fell and that lineage lost power, the estate may have lost its purpose and its support system. Another possibility is that the population fled when they heard of the Spanish advance, not wanting to be captured or to see their sacred city desecrated. A third theory is that the city was depopulated by disease. If smallpox reached Machu Picchu, it could have killed most of the population, leaving the survivors too few to maintain the city. Most likely, it was a combination of factors. The empire's collapse disrupted the supply networks that supported Machu Picchu. The mitter labor that maintained the terraces and buildings was no longer available. The religious significance of the site may have been tainted by the empire's defeat, and disease likely took a heavy toll. Whatever the reason, the people of Machu Picchu left. They took their portable possessions and disappeared into the jungle or to other settlements. Nature began to reclaim the city. The terraces, no longer maintained, began to crumble. Trees grew up through the plazas. Vines covered the buildings. Rain eroded the retaining walls. But the stone structures, built with such skill and precision, endured. The temples stood. The fountains continued to flow. The Intihuatana remained, waiting for priests who would never return to worship at it. For 400 years, Machu Picchu slept, hidden in the cloud forest, known only to a few local farmers who grazed their animals among the ruins. Then, in 1911, Hiram Bingham arrived. He cleared away the vegetation, photographed the site, and told the world what he had found. The rediscovery of Machu Picchu captured the world's imagination. Here was a lost city, a glimpse of a vanished civilization, a testament to the ingenuity and vision of the Inca. In the century since Bingham's discovery, Machu Picchu has been studied intensively. Archaeologists have excavated, measured, and analyzed. They have developed theories about its purpose and its history, but much remains mysterious. We still do not know its original name. We are not certain exactly when it was built or why. We do not know where the people went when they left. What we do know is that Machu Picchu represents an extraordinary achievement. It shows what humans can accomplish through skill, organization, and devotion. It reminds us that great civilizations rise and fall, but the works they leave behind can endure for centuries today. Machu Picchu is one of the most visited tourist sites in the world. Thousands of people hike the Inca Trail each year, following the ancient stone path that the Inca built to reach their sacred mountain city. They come to see the sunrise over Machu Picchu, to walk through the temples and terraces, to stand at the Intihuatana and imagine the priests who once worshipped there. They come seeking connection to the past, to a time and place so different from our modern world, yet connected to us by our shared humanity. The Inca are gone. Their empire is dust. But Machu Picchu remains, a city in the clouds, a monument to human ambition and creativity, and a window into a world we can only imagine. End. So our journey through Machu Picchu comes to an end. We have climbed the stone steps to the city in the sky. We have walked through its streets and terraces. We have greeted the rising sun from the We have worked the fields with tupac, cooked with kusi woven cloth, made offerings to the gods, and lived, if only in our imaginations, as the people of this ancient mountain city once lived. We have seen how the Inca transformed an impossible mountainside into a habitable city through engineering genius and patient labor. We have seen how they created a sophisticated society without money, without writing, without the wheel, relying instead on reciprocity, oral tradition, and human ingenuity. We have learned that Machu Picchu was not just a city, but a sacred site. A place where humans could come close to the gods, where the earth and the sky met, where the sun god could be worshipped at the point where he was born each morning. And we have seen how this world came to an end, swept away by invasion and disease, leaving behind only stones and silence. But those stones speak to us still. They tell us of a people who looked at a sheer mountain peak and said, "Here we will build a city." They tell us of farmers who carved terraces into cliffs, of weavers who spun thread finer than silk, of priests who charted the movements of the stars and the sun. They tell us that human creativity and determination can overcome almost any obstacle, can build beauty and meaning in the most unlikely places. Machu Picchu reminds us that all civilizations, no matter how powerful, are temporary. The Inca believed their empire would last forever. It lasted barely a century before it was destroyed, but it also reminds us that the works of human hands and minds can outlast empires. The Inca Empire is gone, but Machu Picchu remains, speaking across the centuries, inviting us to remember and to wonder. Thank you for joining me on this journey to the ancient mountain city. I hope you have found it as fascinating as I have. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like it and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us create more of these long-form historical explorations. I'd also love to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever visited Machu Picchu? Would you like to? What aspect of Inca civilization do you find most intriguing? Are there other ancient cities or civilizations you'd like us to explore in future videos? Until our next journey into the past, I wish you peaceful rest. Let the story of Machu Picchu accompany you into your dreams. Dreams perhaps of stone terraces climbing impossibly steep slopes, of mist swirling through ancient plazas, of the sun rising over sacred peaks, of a city in the clouds where once, long ago, people lived their lives in the shadow of the gods. Good night, and thank you for listening to History at Night.